You know that feeling when a project is, when it's finally done?
Oh, yeah.
The presentation looks slick, the
Yeah.
team is high-fiving, the energy is up.
Everyone is ready to just launch the thing.
Right. And then silence.
The dreaded pause in the room.
Exactly. One hand goes up in the back.
Yeah.
And it's, it's that one person, the one who asks the question that pulls a loose thread.
And suddenly the whole sweater starts unraveling.
Yeah. The balloon pops. The mood shifts from celebration to defense in about 3 seconds flat.
It's a completely polarized reaction to a very, very specific type of energy.
So that is what we are unpacking today. We're looking at this and asking, is this negativity? Is it pessimism?
Or is it a superpower that we are just completely misunderstanding?
Exactly. We're deep diving into a specific personality profile known as the AAWN, or the Insight Critic.
It's such a fascinating profile. We're basing this deep dive on the Max Energy ME80 personality system.
Right, the ME80.
Yeah, which is this really robust framework for mapping how human beings process energy.
Like an operating system.
Exactly like an operating system. It maps how we take in data, how we feel about it, and how we actually decide to act.
And we aren't just talking about why someone is grumpy in a Tuesday morning meeting.
Well, not at all.
We are trying to decode the actual operating system of the person who questions everything. Because the source materials suggest that without these people, our systems, our companies, even our families, would basically just drift into chaos.
It's a bold claim.
It is.
But when you look at the mechanics of it, it completely holds up. The mission today is to understand the Insight Critic not as a disruptor,
But as a stabilizer.
exactly, a stabilizer.
So before we get into the brain of the AAWN, give us the quick primer on this Max Energy ME80 system. What are we actually looking at here?
Okay, so think of the ME80 system as a way to visualize the wiring diagram of your psyche.
Okay.
It doesn't just label you with a flat word. It looks at 4 distinct layers of energy flow.
4 layers. Got it.
Right. You have your deep inner values, what anchors you. Then you have your emotional activation, how you react to the world. Third is your decision-making logic, how you calculate your choices. And finally, you have manifestation, how you push that energy out into the real world.
So it's the full circuit board from inside to outside.
Exactly. It's the whole circuit. And the AAWN profile is a very specific, almost high-voltage configuration of these circuits.
Let's start with the identity definition of this profile. The source defines the AAWN with this really evocative phrase. It says it cuts through polished surfaces, using sharp critique to safeguard what truly matters.
Safeguard what truly matters.
Yeah, which feels really contradictory to me. I mean, cutting usually implies damage, right?
Yeah.
But safeguarding implies protection.
That contradiction is the core of their entire existence. See, most people, you and I included, we usually prioritize social harmony or momentum.
We want things to move forward.
Right, we want progress. The Insight Critic, though, prioritizes structural integrity.
Structural integrity.
Think of a structural engineer walking into a beautiful, newly renovated house. You see the fresh paint, the staging, the furniture. They see a load-bearing wall that's buckling under the weight.
Wow. So they can't even enjoy the paint because they know the roof might literally come down.
Exactly. So when they speak up and critique the house, it's not because they hate the paint color.
It's because they see the collapse coming.
Yes. The profile mentions they have this unusually acute sensitivity to details and incongruities.
It's almost like a sensory input for them.
It really is. They don't just think something is wrong, they perceive it. Like a bad smell in a room or a discordant note in a song.
That's such a crucial distinction because I think a lot of us feel attacked by this personality type.
Oh, all the time.
Right. We present an idea, they poke holes in it, and it feels incredibly personal.
But you have to understand, for the AAWN, questioning is not an attack. The source actually calls it the responsible prevention of systemic drift.
Responsible prevention. So if they don't ask the question,
They feel irresponsible.
wow.
To them, staying silent when they see a flaw is literal negligence.
And that term, systemic drift, it sounds like they are constantly fighting against entropy.
They absolutely are. And this ties into their control mechanism. Their control philosophy is what the system calls a global view.
Global view. What does that look like in practice?
Imagine an air traffic controller.
Yeah.
They aren't just looking at one single plane. They're looking at the entire sky, the whole grid.
All right.
If 2 blips are on a collision course, they don't say, well, let's hope for the best because I don't want to ruin the pilot's vibe.
No, they sound the alarm immediately.
Exactly. So their state of mind is constantly operating on high alert with strong logic.
That sounds, I mean, honestly, living like that sounds exhausting.
It can be. They're constantly scanning for ambiguity. Because for the insight critic, ambiguity isn't just annoying, it's dangerous.
It's a threat.
Yes. If something isn't clear, the source says it's a harbinger of future problems.
Okay, I want to get into the actual mechanics of this.
Yeah.
We talked about those 4 layers of the energy matrix earlier.
The ME80 layers, yeah.
Right. I really want to break this down because the combination for the AAWN is pretty unique. How does this energy actually flow through them?
Let's walk through the stack. We start from the deepest layer, the IP.
That's the inner value layer.
Correct. And for the insight critic, this layer is set to direction sense activated.
Correction says activated.
Think of this as an internal compass that is just permanently switched to on.
Okay.
Some people are flexible with their direction. They just kind of go where the group goes. The AAWN has a very rigid sense of north.
So they know immediately if a decision violates a core principle.
Instantly. It's not a debate for them. It's a pure orientation.
So if the team starts drifting off strategy, they don't just think, hey, maybe we're lost. They know it in their bones.
Exactly. Which feeds directly into the next layer, the IQ, or the emotional activation layer.
And the report calls this structure and principle judgment, which I have to say sounds incredibly cold.
It does sound cold.
Usually when we talk about emotions, we're talking about passion, anger, excitement.
Right. But for them, this is the filter. When you or I might react with raw emotion, getting hyped up or getting mad, the insight critic processes that emotion through a logic gate.
They systematize their feeling.
Yes. They literally systematize them. Instead of just feeling bad about a situation, they analyze why it's structurally bad.
So they're asking, is this reaction justified? Does this situation actually make sense?
Precisely. They don't trust an emotion unless it has a logical backbone. If they see a chaotic situation, their emotional reaction isn't panic. It's a profound desire for order.
That explains so much. It explains why they can seem so detached in a heated argument.
Because they're analyzing the argument, not just feeling the heat.
Wow. But then, okay, then we get to the third layer, the EQ, or decision calculation layer. And this really surprised me when I read it.
A sensing aspect.
Yeah. You'd expect a critic to be purely 100% logical. But the source says their function here is emotional sensing and resonance.
It's a huge paradox. And honestly, this is the secret sauce of this entire profile.
How so?
Well, we assume they are robots just crunching data. But the AAWN actually relies heavily on sensing. They feel the off notes in the environment.
Like an intuition.
Yes, but a highly specific kind. They might look at a new business deal and just feel a sense of dissonance.
Even if the logic looks okay on paper.
Exactly. The spreadsheet might be flawless, but they resonate with the environment and detect that something is hidden or fake.
So their gut check actually informs their logic.
Always. They often sense the error before they can even articulate it. They'll just say, something is wrong here.
And then they use that strong logic to hunt down what triggered the feeling.
Exactly. It's a radar for risk.
That is fascinating. It's not just Spock-like cold logic. It's a deeply intuitive sense of things being out of alignment.
Right. And that leads to the final layer, the manifestation layer.
How the energy comes out.
The source describes this simply as energy released outward.
Which is why they cannot keep their mouths shut in meetings.
Precisely. Some profiles might see a huge risk and think, well, that's not my department. I'll just keep my head down.
Not the AAWN.
Never. The AAWN is wired to manifest. The energy actively pushes outward. If they see a crack in the foundation, the internal pressure builds up until they say something.
They are driven to impact the world by correcting it.
Exactly.
So, just recapping this wiring, we've got a compass locked on north, a filter that systematizes emotion, a radar that feels hidden risks, and a drive to speak up about it no matter what.
It is a formidable combination.
It really is.
It's a powerful engine for problem solving. But it also leads us to their core inner trait, which the source calls the simulator.
Oh, I love this concept in the notes. Break down the simulator for us.
Imagine a supercomputer in their head, constantly running millions of scenarios. The insight critic's brain naturally deconstructs facts and cross-references causal chains.
So they are constantly running a mental simulation of the future.
Always. It's like, if we do A, then B happens, which risks C, which inevitably collapses D.
They're literally rehearsing the disaster.
They are pre-living the failure.
See, this is where that label pessimist comes from.
Of course it is.
If I say to my friend, hey, let's go on a spontaneous road trip, And they immediately say, well, the tires are low and there's a storm coming. I'm just hearing negativity. I'm hearing that they don't want to go.
But what they are actually saying is, I want us to get there alive.
Right.
The expert view from the ME80 here is crucial. They are not pessimists. They're creating safety margins for systems.
They want the project to succeed, so they are mapping the landmines so you can walk around them.
Exactly. And there was a really poignant detail in the text about what happens when you ignore them, the mental echo.
Yes. The source said unresolved questions reverberate in their mind until a reasonable answer is found.
It sounds a bit like a haunting, doesn't it?
It really does. It sounds completely involuntary.
It is involuntary. This is why you cannot spin an insight critic.
You can't just give them PR talk.
No. If you give them a half answer just to shut them up, or use corporate jargon to gloss over a problem, it will not work.
The question just keeps echoing in their head.
It creates unbearable cognitive noise for them. They literally cannot find peace until the logic clicks into place.
So when they keep pressing you on a point, when they won't let it go, it's not because they want to torture you.
No.
It's because they are trying to stop the echoing in their own head. They need the resolution.
Precisely.
However, and we have to talk about this, even with the best intentions, this intensity comes with a massive social cost.
It really does.
Every superhero has a weakness. Let's talk about the shadow blind spot. What is the kryptonite for the AAWN?
The shadow is defined as questioning and alienation, and it stems from a very specific order of operations in their brain.
Which is?
They have a strong tendency to first see defects and later see effort.
Oh, ouch. That is the relationship killer right there.
It really is. Imagine you've worked all weekend on a huge proposal.
Okay.
You are exhausted, you are proud, you put your heart into it, you hand it to an insight critic. What is the very first thing they say?
They're going to say the font on page 4 is wrong.
Or this revenue projection doesn't add up.
Right. They don't mean to be cruel, but their eye is drawn to the flaw like a laser beam.
They might actually value your effort immensely, but they literally cannot see past the error until it is fixed.
It blocks their view of the whole project.
Exactly.
But to the person receiving that feedback, it just feels like, you don't appreciate me.
Of course. And the source warns that if the AAWN doesn't soften their delivery, it can sound like cold mockery.
Which pushes people straight into a defensive position.
Yes. Instead of collaborating to fix the error, the other person starts defending their worth as a human being.
And once that happens, communication is totally dead.
And the critic gets frustrated too, because they have an instinctive aversion to what they perceive as a lack of professionalism.
To them, feelings shouldn't get in the way of facts.
Right, but human beings aren't built that way.
Which leads to what the notes call the self-validation loop.
Yes, this is a dangerous cycle.
How does that play out?
This happens when the critic feels unheard. Let's say they point out a valid risk, and the team just ignores them to keep the peace.
The critic doesn't just let it go.
Never. To prove their judgment is right, they start accumulating massive amounts of evidence.
Like, see? I told you. Here are 10 more reports explaining exactly why I'm right.
It becomes obsessive. They dig in. They desperately need to prove the validity of their insight.
Which is exhausting for them and completely overwhelming for everyone else.
It turns a valid observation into a crusade.
So, understanding this dynamic is huge for anyone working with them. Or living with them, for that matter.
Absolutely.
Socially, what is the vibe they generally give off?
Yeah.
The text mentions they're composed and detached.
Yeah, they aren't the life of the party in the traditional sense. Small talk isn't really their native language because it lacks substantive content.
They just want to cut directly to the real issues.
Exactly.
And there's this incredible paradox described in the relationships section. It says they are a trustworthy, yet somewhat oppressive presence. That is such a heavy description.
It's heavy, but it's so accurate. Think about it. You feel incredibly safe delegating important tasks to them.
Because you trust they won't let anything slip through the cracks.
Right. If an AAWN says a contract is good, it's good. You sleep better knowing they are on watch, but you are terrified to be reviewed by them. It creates anxiety. You know, if you hand your work to an insight critic, it will be torn apart.
It will definitely be made better, but the process is going to be painful.
Exactly. It makes them a necessary but not entirely comfortable presence.
I think everyone listening can picture a specific face right now. So let's pivot to making this actionable.
Okay.
If we have these people in our organizations, or if you are this person, where do they belong? What is their ultimate business value?
Their superpower is defined as exceptionally strong risk prediction and logical review capacity.
So if you are building a bridge, you want this person on the team.
If you're launching a rocket, you want this person checking the math.
But timing seems to be everything here.
Crucially, you want them early in the project. The source explicitly notes they are best at detecting potential explosions to buy time for the team to actually fix them.
If you bring them in at the very end.
It's a total disaster.
Right.
If you bring them in the day before a product launch, they will find a flaw, and then you have to choose between delaying the launch or ignoring them.
If you ignore them and fail, they say, I told you so.
And if you delay, everyone hates them.
You have to bring them in when the plans are still wet.
Yes. They are the ultimate gatekeeper. They are skilled at what the system calls small-scale validation.
Meaning they test the ice before the whole army marches across the frozen lake.
Perfect analogy. They prevent organizations from falling into deep, expensive traps.
So specifically, what career fields should they look for? The source lists a few recommended professions where this personality doesn't just survive, but thrives.
The ME80 system is very clear on this. You want them in roles where defense and logic are the priority, not necessarily sales or morale building.
Makes sense. So what's first?
First is risk management, obviously, establishing defenses before a crisis hits. They are natural-born risk managers. Second is legal and compliance, clause assessment, finding the logical gaps in contracts that everyone else misses.
They're the ones actually reading the terms and conditions.
While the rest of us just click accept blindly.
Right.
Then there is quality audit and internal control, maintaining those high standards.
Strategy.
Yes, strategy analysis, deconstructing complex logic. If we enter this new market, what are the causal chains? They see the chess moves 5 turns ahead.
They are basically the immune system of a company.
That is exactly it. And look, the immune system isn't always comfortable. It gives you a fever to kill the virus.
It keeps you alive.
The insight critic hunts down the viruses, the bad logic, the hidden risks, the errors, and eliminates them to keep the organism healthy.
I want to talk about the internal experience of the critic one last time before we wrap up.
Ah.
Because we've talked a lot about how they affect others.
Right.
But what does it feel like to actually be them?
It can be incredibly lonely. Being the one who always sees the crack in the wall means you rarely get to just relax and enjoy the party.
You're always on duty.
Always carrying the weight of what could go wrong.
And that brings us to the golden sentence from the source material. This really shifted my perspective on what drives this personality.
It's a beautiful thought. It says, when questioning is taken seriously and risks are successfully averted, when systems become cleaner and more stable as a result, the insight critic can truly feel that deep settling that comes from knowing things didn't fall apart.
Things didn't fall apart.
That's the ultimate victory for them. It's not about being right for the sake of ego. It's about safety. It's about the survival of the structure.
So when they ask that annoying question, it's actually a profound act of care.
It's likely the most sincere form of care they know how to give. They are just trying to keep the roof from falling on your head.
Wow. Well, I will definitely look at the critics in my life a little differently now. Instead of getting defensive, maybe the right response is just good catch.
Good catch is probably the best thing you can possibly say to an AAWN. It validates their insight and lowers their defensive shields immediately.
It tells them, I see the risk too, thanks to you.
Exactly.
Which leaves me thinking about something we haven't touched on yet.
Oh.
If the AAWN is the immune system, how much of our modern world's safety, our bridges, our planes, our financial systems, is built entirely on the silent anxiety of insight critics who refused to just let things slide?
That is a fascinating thought. We owe a lot to the people willing to be unpopular for the sake of getting it right.
We really do. Well, that brings us to the end of this deep dive. It's a lot to process, but understanding these energy dynamics can profoundly change how your team functions. As a reminder, this analysis comes directly from the Max Energy ME80 Personality Assessment Report.
Yeah, and if this resonated with you, or if you think you might be an insight critic, or if you work with one and need some help decoding them, you can find out more at their official website, www.maxenergylife.com.
You can also search on Facebook for Max Energy Issue or Mid Energy Ho. There's a whole world of energy dynamics to explore there.
It's always worth understanding the wiring under the hood.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening. And here's to the people who keep the wheels from falling off. See you on the next deep dive.